Amen. Amen. Okay, so so this morning I'm going to talk about contentment and see if we have content people here and what the importance of contentment is and what the Bible says about it. And of course, our overarching theme here in this class, once again, is in his steps. And of course, I think about Jesus, when he said the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Do you think he was weeping when he said that? And poor me, I just, no, never, 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 But this is it's an attitude. Certainly, we talked about attitudes last week, and this is a characteristic of people who follow Jesus. And so we know the circumstances of his life as a man in this world. And he certainly wasn't rich and enjoying all of the luxuries. That's not why he came into this world. But then that begs the question, is that why we came into this world? Right? And so we're going to get into this morning and take a good look at this idea here of contentment. Okay, there's a passage in 1 Timothy 6 that I think is a good one for us to start with because it states the degree of importance that we should attach to this idea of contentment, and we'll define what it means, and we'll give a definition of contentment to work with in our class. But here in 1 Timothy 6, verse 6, he says, "But godliness," right? And so remember, godliness is a godly person is someone whose life is God-centered, right? It's centered around God. That's a godly person. Make sense? Okay? So godliness, so if your life is centered around God, actually is a means of great gain. So if we stop right there, that's obvious, right? That should be, well, of course, right? If your life is centered around God and all that comes with that. He says, when accompanied by contentment. So would it be accurate then to, if we look at the converse of that and say that godliness is not a means of great gain when not accompanied by contentment? Okay, well, that's kind of funny because, godliness certainly is going to be beneficial, but whether we are content within that life of godliness or discontent is going to obviously make some kind of a difference, and perhaps, we'll table that. We'll go. So, for we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. It seems like when the Bible talks about being content or discontent, that it seems like it centers around material things, right? Having or not having things. And that is very true, but let's just ask a question in our mind and say, well, does it have to do with other things also? Okay, and so we're going to explore that in as much as we have time to do so this morning. So you didn't bring anything here. You're not going to take anything with you. And if we have food and covering, with these we shall be content. Okay, and again, we're going to define content here in a little bit. But if you have food and covering, okay, you should be content. Yeah.
So, you're going about answering your question now, but I'm just, you back up into this chapter. It starts, and maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem to me that Paul is talking about physical things at all. He's talking about somebody who is striving for godliness so that they might have means to argue with you, or they might be a little bit more enlightened, a little smarter than you, and that they can use that to argue with you. So I think that's what is the gain I think he's talking about, is this enlightened, this type of a gain. I'm a little bit better than you because, you know what, I understand, I'm a little more godly than you. So let's have an argument. Now, and of course he's going to get into, I think, this idea of, obviously he's going to get into this idea of a physical game coming up, but that's not where he started, I don't think.
Okay, well, that's fair. You know, I mean, I can't speak to that definitively at the moment.
Yeah.
But okay, we'll take that into consideration. But those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a snare and many foolish and harmful desires which plunge men into ruin and destruction. So if there's a discontent, you're not contented with what you have, and then that love of money starts to come in. Then there's ruin, harmful ruin, destruction, for the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil, and some by longing for it have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many a grief. So godliness with no contentment, it seems that he's saying, is going to draw you away from God, right? It's going to be the door that pulls you away because you're now going to be pursuing other things. And we know, Issaquah, that we cannot serve two masters, right? Okay? It's going to be one or it's going to be the other, but it is impossible to serve them both. So discontent then in this area of physical, or like he's talking about being rich, longing after riches. So discontent here in this context is going to be a very destructive influence in a person's life, okay? So one way of expressing contentment, it is a state of being where one is satisfied with their current situation and the state of affairs in one's life as they presently are. All right, so contentment is not, and we'll talk about this more, but it is not just saying, oh, everything's fine, I'll just hang right here. No ambition, no desire to change. That's not really what we're talking about, and we'll talk about. But as things stand today, it's enough. It's enough. This is enough. I have enough. I have way more than enough as far as these physical things are concerned. I'm like, I feel bad almost because, but I pray for people around the world who are suffering, waking up in a war-torn country. They don't have a home. They don't know when they're going to eat. Their loved ones are dead. They've got a tyrant empire builder, attacking them every day. And I look around me and it's peaceful and it's tranquil and I know that the reason that it's peaceful and tranquil is because there are people guarding the wall. If we didn't have the military guarding the wall, then we wouldn't have this peaceful, tranquil environment. But we do, and it's a blessing. And so it's really easy to be content. But we're also going to talk about the challenge of being content when things are really good, because there's a challenge there too, okay? So things as they presently are, though. See, and so if one is content, they are pleased with their situation and how the elements in one's life are situated. Yeah, Steve?
This issue we're talking about this morning may be one of the single largest problems that is result of the computer age that we live in. We have at our disposal, like that, the ability to see grandness everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Before we had that power to be able to just jump on the internet and see this or that or the other thing, we were kind of blind to it.
Yeah.
And it was easier, not trying to say that the old ways are better. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just saying that with all of the good things that have come out of the internet, that suffered
Yeah.
at an extraordinary level. It's just so hard to be satisfied with anything because you can see so quickly what you don't have.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
I like what Todd was saying too about the context before it, because it's the same thing is true. If we're desiring to be right and prideful about our position in things, I mean, it's the same thing is true. You know, how much people are liking what we say on media or whatever, we're wanting and desiring to be puffed up, have other people agree with us. There can be a lack of contentment with that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 And we're going to see some of that this morning. I make all these promises and the clock keeps ticking, so take that into consideration, right? Tyndale's commentary says, detachment from anxious concern about the outward features of this life. Okay. Or pulpit commentary, it is quiet restfulness in the midst of all kinds of changing events, a cordial acquiescence in the arrangements of heaven. Right? You like that? A cordial acquiescence to the arrangements of heaven. Joe and Mary, what? Very good. All right. Yeah. So it's really that idea of enough. And so we're going to look at some examples this morning of people for whom God had provided, but they decided it wasn't enough. Okay. So anyway, we'll get to that hopefully here as we go. So when we talk about contentment, obviously, you think about these definitions that I just read in this light. We know that we experience positive and negative circumstances in our life, right? We understand that. We know that if we've been around, half a minute. But this idea of contentment helps us navigate those times, and I mean the positive times, circumstances, and the negative circumstances. Contentment is a challenge in both those circumstances. Now, you remember Paul, when he talked about being content in Philippians 4, I have learned how, and I'm messing this up a little bit, but I have learned how to be content with a lot or with a little. But both of those pose a challenge. Okay, so we'll talk about that. So, do things have to be perfect? Whatever you define perfect as in order for you to be content. Okay. If contentment is not contingent upon the outward circumstances of our life, it's something that transcends those outward circumstances, right? So things don't have to be perfect to be content. It's not insensibility, like I don't care, and it's not self-satisfaction. You in Revelation 3, we are rich and have need of nothing. Remember I think it's Laodicea, right? And you don't know that you're poor and wretched and miserable and blind and naked. Okay, so it's not the attitude that hey, I'm self-satisfied, I don't need anything, I'm complete. That's not really the idea when we talk about contentment. So is it easy? This is a very simple question. Is it easy to be content when things are tough? Okay. Now, I'm not asking if it's possible to be content when things are tough. I'm just asking, is it easy? I'm satisfied, I'm okay with things as they are when things are tough. Okay. It's not easy, especially if you're not thinking it through or if you're not aware of certain realities when that kind of a thing is going on. First of all, we have to be aware that hard times are guaranteed in this life. Guaranteed. Okay? So awareness and then acceptance. If we're just talking about when things are hard, a negative situation. So being aware, first of all, that this is life on planet Earth. We are going to go through tough times. And then secondly, bringing a sense of acceptance to that negative situation. Now, when I say acceptance, I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if anybody's mind goes straight to resignation. I'm going to resign myself to this situation. Okay. That's not acceptance. That's not acceptance. Resignation is in and of itself negative, right? Acceptance is a whole nother deal, okay? How can we explain that? How can we think about that? Here's my situation. It doesn't have to be any different than it is. It doesn't have to be different, okay? So we'll have an idea of how we want things to be, okay? We want it to be this way, but it's this way, right? Okay, so here's what you got, and here's what you want, and there's a gap, right? The stress gap, right? That tension. I want this, but I got this. And so in acceptance, and we Christians, we can do this, and it makes perfect sense, is that whatever I got, that's what I want. Because who's in control anyway? Okay? You're in the hands of a loving, wise God who wants you to grow. Okay? And so one of the things that is going to come up in this are the benefits of those tougher times. Did I see a hand? Oh yeah, Robert.
I think you're getting to the point that I was trying to make with regard to contentment is found in an acknowledgement of who God is and that He is, again, ruling in the kingdoms of men. And so whether or not we're in dire straits or we're blessed beyond what we deserve, in either case, if we truly understand who God is and His role in our lives, we should be content. And I think that we can sometimes make it more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it's challenging because, again, the things of this world are a distraction to us. But when we were talking about, the internet and whatnot, I went to 1 John 2, verse 16. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but it is from the world. Mm-hmm. And it's like, we need to, again, remember who our Father is and the blessings that
Mhm.
He provides us, even in those struggles of life, which help strengthen us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Keep your life free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For, okay, that Greek word gar, the reason being, He has said, I will never forsake, or excuse me, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Okay? Don't worry about, okay, of course, we've been in the Sermon on the Mount, and we're going to get back to that, but in chapter 6, don't worry about food. Don't worry about clothing, right? Don't worry about any of those things, because God says, I'll never leave you or forsake you. Okay? So we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Okay? Of course, in the context of Hebrews, they're taking their stuff, right? They're going through a hard time that way. Yeah, Mary?
Yeah, I just think,
Yeah.
that it comes down to
Mm-hmm.
trusting God,
Yep.
because the situation changed, your expectations are here, and sometimes you have to agree what happened,
Mm-hmm.
come to that acceptance, but it comes down to trusting.
It sure does, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
good observation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what it all comes down to that. We're here in this little finite, short life that we're living, and that's the choice, the basic choice that we make. Do we trusting Him or not trusting Him? And it makes all the difference in the world. Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Okay, so when things are tough, and we're going to get to the negative or the positive side in a little bit. You think about here in Acts 5, I always love this. They took his advice, Gamaliel, to the council. After calling the apostles, they flogged them and ordered them not to speak in the name of Jesus, and then released them. So we read that they flogged them, and then we just go on, right? I mean, wait a minute. Back up. Okay? Their backs are ripped up. Okay, I mean, it wasn't the Spirit's intent to describe all that to us. There's a different point going on here, but just remember, these guys took a beating with a whip. Ouch. Right? Ouch, that's a little understated, but yeah. And so they're flogged, ordered not to speak in the name of Jesus, released them. So they went on their way from the presence of the council. I can't believe this happened to us. No. I mean, there may have been tears, and there's pain, and there's a sense of injustice and sadness, because they know who Jesus is. They know. They were with Him. They were taught by Him. They saw Him die. They saw Him raise. They knew who He was. And yet here these Jews are beating them and telling them, you don't talk in His name. You don't preach His name. I'm sure their hearts are sad for them and all of that. But yet they leave the presence of the council rejoicing. Okay, there's an inner joy that those circumstances can't touch, right? That they had been considered worthy to suffer shame in the eyes of others for His name. So there was something bigger than them. What if their lives were centered on themselves? Then they would have been whining and crying and complaining, and how could God let this happen? Why did But they were centered. They were focused on something bigger than them, and they trusted someone. And so they endured this, and not only did they endure it, but they rejoiced. So we have passages like this one, of course, very familiar passages to most of us that have to do with this concept. Consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. Now, this is what I mean by thinking it through. For Christians, this makes sense. Knowing. So you're in the trial. You're not just in the trial. But as you face that trial, knowing that the testing of your trust, right, the testing of your faith, putting it under pressure, okay, produces endurance, right? You have something, Joe?
Yeah, think about it. One thing about the apostles is they left. They gave up their stuff. So they turned it over. They turned everything they had over, even that consciousness of myself.
Yeah.
And so we have to do that too. And that's very hard for us to do because to give that up,
Yeah.
when you begin to start giving that up, then it's easier to trust.
Yeah.
You have to give up something to take on the other thing. And
Yeah.
I cannot be about myself
Yeah.
and say I trust in God.
Yeah.
I can't have it.
Now remember what he said, because we're going to be talking about church membership this morning, okay? And what Joe said about giving yourself. See, being a member of a Daryl, don't you preach that sermon. Okay? See, all right. So, it's, the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart, right? Yeah, so anyway, just remember that, okay? And I'll stop there. So we have all these passages in the Bible, 1 Peter chapter 1, where he talks about, in this you greatly rejoice, even though for a little while you've been distressed by various trials, right? So they're rejoicing. And because they know they're going to receive as the outcome of their faith, the salvation of their soul. They know that, okay? And so there's all kinds of passages. Romans 5, we exult in our tribulations, and all kinds of Bible that supports and confirms these ideas. And so when we are in the negative situation, then Christians know that it's not random, but it has purpose if we are attuned to the Word of God and listening to Him and trusting Him and knowing that no matter what happens, He's not going to leave us or forsake us, and so that we can derive benefit from those situations. Okay. Now, I mentioned that when we look at some of these passages, have to do with the love of money or being content with what you have, and those kind of things. But there's discontentment that can come up in other ways, or through other stimulus, and just we could spend a lot of time in here. But I just wanted to go back to a couple of things in the Old Testament. One of them is in Numbers 12 and has to do with Miriam and Aaron. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, and all the people who were on the face of the earth. And suddenly the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, come near, and we know what happened there. But down at verses 9, the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. When the cloud removed over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous like snow, and Aaron turned toward Miriam, behold, she was leprous. Okay. Well, who is the one who arranged things as they were arranged? That was God. But that's not enough. Okay. That's not enough. This is where I've been placed, but I'm not satisfied. Okay? I'm not satisfied. And so I'm going to cause trouble because I think I should have a better or a different role in things than I do. Okay? Not content. right? So when I was up at Kirkland that couple of years, I mean, I probably preached, I don't know, 3 or 4 times in that whole time. I had a hard time being content, right? You know, I mean, I wanted to be, you know, and it's like the Lord's like, no, this is where you need to be at this point in your life. So do what you're given to do. And that was not easy. Okay, now it's not that I wanted to take Brent's job or anything like that. It was just, I just wanted to be doing what he was doing, right? Somewhere, right? And, you know, but again, the Lord takes care of those things. But they were not content with the role that they had been given. And of course, you know the story of Korah and Dathan and Abiram and how the earth opened up and swallowed them, okay? But it was the same thing. It was just that being discontent with how things were and then expressing that discontent, and you see what God's response to that was, right? So without going into it, we don't really have time to go into all this. I knew that we wouldn't. But you know these stories, and you know kind of what happened as a result. Now, contentment can be very difficult in good times. Okay? So here we are. Things are great. Right? But they could be greater. Things are good. Things are lovely, but they could be better. Right? So sometimes people try to one-up themselves from where they are at the moment. Well, I'm doing this is great, but man, just think of, okay? And often, Steve, this goes to your point, it's because we're comparing ourselves with other people, right? And this passage just flashed into my mind. I know Paul was talking about false teachers and the Jews that were accusing him falsely and things like that. But one of the things he says, when they compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding, right? So those comparisons, and of course the retail concerns are very interested in making sure that you are not satisfied with where you are. You know, I've been watching the Wimbledon, tennis, tournament. And there's a commercial for Rolex that comes on, and I see it come on and I just fast forward through it. And the only reason is because it's like, it's such a beautiful watch, and they make it, it's so like, man, this prestigious, and I'm like, what a bunch of empty foolishness, But that's what, that's the goal. It's like, man, if I had me now see, I wouldn't wear one of those in here because you'd be like, that'd be immodest. That's, you'd be like, shiny, get my, I can making payments, get all, But look, I mean, I couldn't do that, but you get the point. It's just trying to create dissatisfaction. Okay, and Socrates, who we don't quote all that much around here, but he says, quote, "He who is not contented with what he has would not be contented with what he would like to have," end quote. So the Bible puts it, and again, this just flashed into my mind, I might mess it up, but the eye is not satisfied with seeing, or the ear, But you remember that passage in there in the Bible there somewhere, maybe in Ecclesiastes? We're never satisfied, generally speaking. We just always want more. It could be better. So even when things are going well, if we're not attuned in, and this takes trust of God also, okay? That what you have today is enough for today. I hope that we have occasion to get back into the Old Testament and just from the beginning here, and especially in the wilderness, And that was one of the things that the Jews had to learn in that desert, is that God is going to provide for you what you need today. And that's enough. That needs to be enough. See? Yeah, Joe?
I'm thinking about Abraham is for financial type person.
Yeah.
Live like no one else so that you can live like no one else. And that philosophy is, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, 86% of Americans are in credit card debt.
Yeah.
That means when they get to the age where they're in retirement, they're still stuck in those bills, okay?
Yeah.
So live like no one else is. Don't get yourself in that. You know, live a life more, the contentful life of less.
Yeah.
And when you are older, you'll live like no one else because you won't be in those bills
Yeah.
and you won't be having those troubles.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I've said to Monique all along, is that, when we get, let's just at least, no matter what we have or don't have, let's at least not owe anybody anything. The problem with that, the reason I'm so urgent about that is because if you have those debts, the money that you're putting to, about this much of it, that's just going to them. There's no power, there's no buying power. You're given. That's hard for me to, and say I'm a temperament, counselor, right? So I use temperament. And so the melancholy temperament, which I am, one of the tendencies is to fear of not having enough money. Okay, so I'm not worried about it, but I also don't want to be paying interest to people and just things that we could be using, and we're just giving it to somebody else. So, yeah, Joe.
And if you have a credit card, we know that this is a study at that time. You use your credit card more, or you don't see the money you're spending. So you spend 49% more
Yeah.
on top of what you would spend, more than you make actually.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
And when you use cash, we tend to spend 10% less than we spend because we see the money in our hands, we see it going away, and
Yeah.
the physicalness of seeing what you have, that's where the contentment starts to happen. You start to realize this is what I have.
Yeah.
It's not something that's imaginary that I can't see.
Yeah.
And then it creeps up on you and you're in trouble.
Now, do you think that has anything to do with so many companies now that are going cashless? Just a question. Yeah. Kevin?
You had quoted earlier from Philippians with Paul talking about
Yeah.
whether it's in abundance or in little.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier, he kind of talks about all of that throughout chapter 4 of Philippians. And something that I liked, I was looking at it, earlier in the chapter is where he talks about rejoice, and again I say rejoice.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, do not be anxious about anything. And I like that he addresses that idea of do you feel like you have too little? Do you have a lot? And here he says, don't be anxious about anything. I think a lot of times we think, I'm anxious about whether or not I'm going to have food tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But in these other scenarios, I'm anxious about the debt that I have. I'm anxious about
Yeah. Yeah.
increasing my prestige. I'm
Mhm.
anxious about whether or not I'll have a job. Maybe I'm good right now, but I'm anxious if I'll have a job tomorrow. There's all sorts of things to be anxious about. But Paul's direction is rejoice, and then he says, if you're anxious, pray, and he says, and with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving. And so it seems to me like the rejoicing, I know we think of rejoicing as joy and happiness, but it also seems to be tied with the thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about that multiple times throughout chapter 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and then he ends it with the secret that I've found is it's God that strengthens me. So whatever the scenario is, I know that the strength I have is from God. I know the things that I've been given I'm grateful for, and I will celebrate and rejoice that God is with me.
Yeah.
And that he's
Good.
what he's given me. And I think that that's for me, I think that that's a key part of contentment.
Mhm.
And that helps eliminate your anxiety,
Okay.
regardless of what the anxiety is.
Sure. Yeah.
That's where your focus and mindset is I'm grateful and thankful, and I'm going to talk to God about it.
Yeah. So the balance then that we're wanting to strike is between contentment and striving to better yourself. Okay, there should be a balance there. Okay, peace and satisfaction is important in life, to be content, but also it's important to work to improve your life. There's nothing wrong with that. Spiritually, primarily, but in whatever way, it's a good thing. It's just everything needs to be in balance. Okay, and I keep threatening to preach this sermon. I've been thinking about it for decades. Just preach a sermon about the balance of the Bible. Just look at different things and see how you have this, but God keeps everything in balance. If we listen to Him, we'll have that equanimity in our life, and we'll be content. So it doesn't mean to become complacent and settle. Appreciate in the good times. Be grateful for your life. And also in the tough times, remember that the Lord is in control. He will never leave you or forsake you. So striking that balance. So, hey guys, thank you for a great class. That was really good, and we've only just begun. So, class dismissed.